Okay, welcome everyone to the Tuesday, June the 4th, 2024 session in our series on entrepreneurship and Asian high-tech industries. Before we get started, I want to thank the member companies of the US-Asia Technology Management Center because it's their support that allows us to put on this series. And also, we even have some refreshments afterward outside at the end of the program. We hope that those of you who are here in person will stay and network and talk with each other for a while after our program is over. For anyone who is taking this as a course for credit at Stanford, the deadline for all of your materials to get to me is the scheduled exam time for this course. Of course, we don't have an exam in the course, but the end of the scheduled exam time, Friday, June the 9th. That's not Friday, that's Sunday. Sunday, yeah, Sunday, June the 9th at 10 p.m. Anyway, please get your material into me at that point. And if you do have questions about your standing, feel free to send me a note. I'm a little bit late with the last few weeks of comments, so we will get it back to you, and you should know well before the end of the course if you have any issues, if we have any issues with your records. Also, I'd like to ask all the students who are registered, please fill out the online course evaluation. This is actually important to me. Remember, you're evaluating the way the course is put together, not any particular speaker in the series, except maybe me as the overview speaker in the first week. But really, what did you get from the series? How well was it put together? That kind of thing. We really pay attention to your comments, and they are important. So way back in the year 2017, we did an entire quarter series on the rise of space businesses in Asia. About 40% of our presentations came out of Japan because Japan was quite leading in this area already. The whole idea of using space as a platform for some kind of business is relatively recent. There have been communication satellites and TV satellites for years, right? But it was really SpaceX and some of the more recent launch services that brought down the cost of anything into low Earth orbit that made suddenly much more interest in space possibilities for business. In that regard, today we have a great panel. First of all, sitting closest to me is Professor Naohiko Kohtake of Keio University. He's the director of the Sensing and Design Lab at Keio. He's also the director of the Space Service Innovation Laboratory Incorporated. So Professor Kohtake is going really to talk about kind of the whole big picture, the process of transferring technologies and ideas from the research domain into the commercial domain. His own background is with Japan's version of NASA, right? JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, where he worked on avionics systems for the H-2A rocket. Before that, he worked on onboard software with the European Space Agency. He's been a visiting researcher at Sony's Computer Science Lab and has worked really on the software side of space business for a long time. Then after Professor Kohtake, we're delighted that joining us by Zoom is Dr. Yuya Nakamura, who is the president and CEO of Axelspace Corporation. Axelspace has been around really since about the year 2009. Dr. Nakamura has led several satellite projects, including RAPIS-1, which was Japan's first government satellite developed by a startup company. He's also been on Japan's Committee for National Space Policy since the year 2015. So we're delighted to have kind of a mid-late stage startup company really in one major domain of space business. Data services will be kind of the focus of what I think Nakamura-san is going to talk to us about. And then for our third speaker, I'm delighted to welcome another one of our visiting scholars at the US Asia Technology Management Center. Shota Deguchi has been with us for a year now. He's the sales director of a startup company called Digital Blast Incorporated, where he heads up marketing and business development. He was really on the founding team of Digital Blast, and before that was doing IT consulting for IBM Japan for a number of years. And just to say welcome, I want to welcome the CEO of Digital Blast, Mr. Shingo Horiguchi, and also Mrs. Horiguchi, who arrived yesterday, I think, and are just on a short-term visit from Japan. So we have a great panel. Deguchi-san is really going to talk about a really early area in space business, namely manufacturing in space. So we have some businesses that are already starting, some businesses that are really in the earlier stage emerging category to talk about today. First, I'd like to ask our panelists to give us their kind of prepared remarks. Professor Kohtake, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your introduction. And so my name is Naohiko, professor of Keio University. And so before this position, I worked for the governmental space activities at JAXA, and also I work with NASA and the European Space Agency. And currently, I work for the academia and the space ventures. And I will explain the current status of Japanese startup company in space domain. And so currently we have about 100 space startups in Japan. And I'm a director of Space Service Innovation Laboratory. This laboratory includes 12 startup ventures in Japan. And I will try to explain about current status and future of the space startup in Japan, because the country, this is very similar to the United States. And so the space activity, JAXA manage everything. For example, the International Space Station, Japan is one of the member states. And also I was in charge of the governmental rocket. And however, the country, the money and the human resources are expanding the transfer to the government, to the private sectors. And I heard, so some of them are not familiar with the space and space application. And I will try to explain about two space applications in my experience. And so first one is sports. Sports is also space application. Do you know why? Yeah, because the country most team sports like American football and baseball and rugby, they use the sensors with GPS. We call the GNSS, navigation satellite, because with the sensors, we can analyze the performance of each players and each team. And so not only the game, but also the practice, we can analyze their activities. Then, so we can understand each performance of the players and the team. However, the problem is the preciseness of the position. But currently, the number of the navigation satellites is increasing. Maybe you know that GPS. GPS is a US navigation satellite. But currently, so several countries like European Union and Russia and China and Japan launch the navigation satellite. Then so preciseness of positioning is improving. I want to show you. Red one is the positioning with large navigation satellite data, not only GPS, but also GPS and Japanese satellite and European satellite and the Chinese satellite. But yellow one is only signal GPS. And so you can understand that the preciseness is much improved with much navigation satellite data. Then, so several companies try to use this data and they try to make some devices for positioning. And so, my university is the oldest, has the oldest rugby team in Japan. And so, yeah, you can understand. So the right side is the image analysis, but left side, so we can analyze the positioning with the GPS, GNSS signals. Then, so preciseness is much improved for past 10 years. However, the price is very high. Do you know how much? And so, you know, your smartphone already has a receiver for the GNSS satellite. It's cost about $10. Not expensive because most people already have. But the sports sensors is about $1,000 for each device. It's very expensive. And so we try to reduce the cost and improve the preciseness of positioning because we have so many satellites and we can change the algorithm for the positioning. Then so we reduce the cost. And so this is one of the venture company from my laboratory. And currently this device is about 10%. This means 100 for each devices. Then with these devices, so we can analyze each players, and so you can understand the left side is images, and the right side is stats data, and the positioning, and also acceleration data. And so we can analyze their performance. And also we can use this data for several points. For example, the communication among the players and the coaches and the stakeholders. And second one is a much, how can I say, big advantage. We can prevent the injuries. So this is a very big impact. And also we can customize the personal training with this data. And we have another sports coaching company. And so this is a very, how can I say, big market for the people. And also we can use this data for the healthcare. And second one is not only human, but also the animals, livestock. But the concept is very similar because we are trying to manage the animals, not only inside the house, but also the freedom places. But problem is the management of animals. Then we use these animals for satellite positioning, left side, GNS. And also we can use Earth observation satellite. And then we can detect the location, the situation of the places for the animals. Then, so we can get the data and we can apply the AI. So this is a very hot topic. And so we apply these technologies and services, not inside Japan, but also the Asian country, like Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand. And so with these data, we can detect their behaviors of animals from space. So this is a much, how can I say, we can apply this concept all over the world. So this is one of the topic. And so we have so many possibility of the businesses. Okay, and so the next topic is a startup, space startup in Japan. And so we have almost 100 startups. And I heard that all over the world about 1,000 space startup companies. Yeah, SpaceX is one of the biggest companies. And so in Japan case, we have a satellite startup and of course launch services and also space explorations. And so past 20 years, most startup company was established. And so today we have two more speakers, Axelspace, CEO Mr. Nakamura, and Deguchi was established in 2019. And so of course they need a budget. And so yeah, this is a investment overview by players. But so some problem is most funding players only inside Japan. And so they are trying to expand their activities and to get money outside Japan. But this is the current ratio of the who invest the space ventures. Okay, and so this is one of the key slide by Japanese government. So we have a space policy. And so the goal and future vision, and we have 4 goals and space security and national resiliencies, and so create new services, and so strengths and companies. And so for that, so government support so many space activities. And so this is the structure of the government in Japan. And mainly we have 4 ministry support space activity in Japan. And first one is a Japanese cabinet office. And second one is a Ministry of the Economics, and second one is a Ministry of the Science and Technology, and fourth one is a Ministry of the Communications. So they prepare for the budget for the space activities. Yeah, one point is until 20 years ago, only MEXT, Ministry of Science Technology, support the space activities. However, currently the 4 ministry support the space activities. Then, so our startup can try to the national security and resilience and applications expanding. Okay, and so this is one of the main slide about the government. And so, yeah, this is a Japanese government role for our space activities, mainly the space startup. And first one is the technology and institutional development realize the space policy. And so the past, many years ago, only JAXA worked for the space development. But currently, the government and JAXA support development for the private sector space ventures. And second one is they encourage the space businesses. And so they have several programs for the startup discovery project. And so many hackathon and business competition. Maybe Stanford has this kind of activities, so many activities. And also startup support businesses. And so many specialists support to create a new startup. So this is a governmental services. And also the human resource is very important. And I'm a professor, and one of the big issue for space company in Japan is they cannot find the right person to do the space startup. Then, so they try to invite international people. And some company, the most people is not non-Japanese people. So if you are interested in the Japanese cultures, anime, and food, please welcome to Japan. And so, yeah, this is a very important point. Also, yeah, human resource management and the talent findings is one of the big topic. And so this is one of the big news for us, and Japanese Cabinet Office decided to funding for multi-billion for space activity for 10 years. And I'm one of the project officer for this funding management. And so then I hope the number of the startup is increasing in the next 10 years. So thank you very much for my presentation.
So maybe you can stop sharing your slide so that we can move on and have Nakamura-san be ready for your presentation. I do have kind of a quick follow-up for you.
Okay.
If you were to say what's distinctive about the whole commercialization of space in Japan, is there anything that's very different from the US or from the European situation? Or is it pretty similar?
I think 2 points. And the first one is that, our Japanese industry is very separated from the national security with the defense people. And so most companies start from the much more safer activities, right? Universities and for example, the other company like mobile, Toyota. And so the second point is that, I already mentioned, so they started only Japanese people start. And after that, so they try to invite so many international people. So this process is a little bit different from that.
Okay, that sounds good. So our next speaker is Dr. Yuya Nakamura of Axelspace, joining us by Zoom from Japan. Dr. Nakamura was one of our speakers in our programs back in 2017. And it's been great to see Axelspace continue to grow and get funding and launch commercial services since we had them featured, 7 years ago now? So Nakamura-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dasha-san. And Hi, everyone. My name is Yuya Nakamura, the President and CEO of Axelspace. Today I'm joining from Japan. I wish I were there to see your faces and join the networking. But anyway, I'm so happy to be a part of this exciting seminar. Let me introduce our company and business briefly. So Axelspace is a space startup based in Tokyo. And since the establishment, we have been developing nano satellite and micro satellites. And this is the satellite called Cruise, which was launched in 2018. So before talking about our business, I just want to introduce how I came across the space industry. Um, Maybe it's surprising, but I was not a space fan at all when I was a kid. So yeah, actually, I liked chemistry when I was a high school student, but I lost interest after entering the university. I had a difficulty in understanding the wave equation or other complicated stuff. So I decided to start new things, and I talked to many professors all around the different departments, and I met Professor Nakasuka at the Department of the Aeronautics and Astronautics, and I learned that the students at his lab were developing CubeSat, a tiny satellite. It was the world's smallest satellite at that time. And I decided to join the team. And since then, I had been involved in 3 satellite projects. By the time I graduated in 2007, I didn't have any intention to be a researcher at the university, but I really loved the satellite development. I continued to my university position until I earned a PhD. And I was involved in the world's first CubeSat program, which was launched in 2003. And also, I experienced 2 more nano satellite projects while I was a student. And I like to talk about the origin of Axelspace. So this is the satellite which I was involved during my school days. And I was a member of the camera subsystem. And I thought that we were able to capture beautiful Earth images. And I thought that it's a shame not to, show these beautiful images to the general public. So I consulted with the project manager of this satellite project that I want to develop some software to, distribute those images to the people. And he said yes. And I started to develop that software by myself. And luckily, we were able to capture very, very beautiful images like this. And I distributed those images together with some, message from lab members. And we had more than 4,000 subscribers to this service. And yeah, thank you. And it was, I'm a shy guy, so I, told the subscribers not to respond to these emails, but unexpectedly, I've got a lot of the responses, and most of the responses were about like encouraging messages, and I realized at that time that what we were doing means something in the society. At the beginning, I was just curious about the development of satellite. I was just an engineer. But when I realized that what I'm doing means something in the society, I started to consider what we can offer to the society using our technology. So that's the starting of the Axelspace. I didn't have any idea to create the company at that time because I didn't see any entrepreneurs around me, and I didn't have any idea to build a company. But this is the beginning of my how can I say feeling of creating something using technology to benefit the society. And when I graduate from the university in 2007, I just wanted to continue developing satellites as my job. And I looked for companies which were developing satellites, and there were no companies. So I talked to the Professor Nakasuka, and he said that we're now trying to create a university startup. Why not joining us? And I said yes. And I didn't have any experience of the company management, but I just wanted to continue the satellite development, and that's why I said yes. But it was tough because I knew nothing about the sales, marketing, and all others, and I started to go to visit many companies to sell our satellites, but no one could say yes. And I spent almost a year in vain, but finally we met Weather News, which is a Japanese company, weather information company, and they decided to have their own satellites. And because they decided, we were able to establish the company. And back in 2008, it was quite difficult to raise funds from the venture capitals, but no one believed that space business could be possible in Japan because all the space activities were the government related back then. So it was almost impossible. So we needed to find the client instead of raising funds from the venture capitals. And so that's how we started the company. And the mission of their satellite was to monitor icebergs in the Arctic Ocean. Due to the global warming, ice in that region is melting rapidly. And many shipping companies were eager to use the Arctic Ocean as a new shipping route. But as you can easily imagine, it's quite dangerous to sail in that area without any safety information. So they requested the Weather News to provide some navigation services, and they tried to purchase images from the existing satellite, but it was too expensive for them to do so. And they started to consider having their own satellites. And we designed our satellite, and they gave us a green light, and the project started in 2008. And it took some time to launch the satellite because this was the first time for most of the rockets to launch the tiny commercial satellites. So we negotiated with a lot of rockets all around the world, and finally we found the Russian rockets to launch our Weather News satellite, and we launched the first one in 2013. And the picture on the right is the sample image taken by our satellite. The resolution is just 200 meters, so it covers a very wide area. The swath would be like 300 kilometers. It's necessary to cover a very wide Arctic region. And they use these images to analyze the ice distribution and to provide a navigation service to shipping companies. So let us move to the company introduction. So here is our vision: space within your reach. When I was a university student developing CubeSat, I thought that the space industry is isolated among the other industries because space is special. Everything is expensive and slow. So I wanted to change that kind of the situation by introducing new technology. I mean, the small satellites, because it's fast, it's inexpensive, so we can deliver some value to the society. So that's what we thought when we started the company. So that was in 2008, long ago. We celebrated the 15th anniversary last year, and we're growing. Now we have around 165 members, and about 30 or 40% of the members are from other countries. So we're enjoying very international atmosphere. Even we're doing business in Japan. We have a track record. We have developed 10 satellites in the past. Here's the list of the satellites what we developed, and we worked with Weather News and JAXA. And also we have our own project called Axel Globe. We launch our own satellites, forming the constellation, and do some business using the satellite data. So we have two types of business at Axelspace. One is Axel Globe. We are launching many satellites into the orbit, taking the pictures, and we provide the images to the client, and also we do some consultation analysis service to provide some solutions to the end users. And for Axeliner, we are starting mass manufacturing of the satellites because the demands are skyrocketing. We need to change the way we develop satellites so that we provide the satellites quickly. And we also work with the partners who can mass manufacture our satellites, and also we're developing the automated operation system so that no human interaction is needed to operate our constellation. So these businesses will together contribute to the future growth of Axelspace, generating synergies to each other. So as Kohtake Sensei introduced, the government budget is skyrocketing after they announced the new policy, Space Industry Vision 2030, back in 2017. And last year, the government secured 1 trillion Japanese yen over the next 10 years, so-called the Space Strategy Fund. And JAXA will be the hub to distribute the funds to industry players through various projects. However, there is an issue. The weight of the support tends to be placed on research and development, not on procurement. So in terms of the data business, selling the satellite data worth millions of dollars to the government every year is still difficult, except the national security sector. And many satellite data startups are aware that they need to establish a business base in the private sector, in addition to the public sector, while there is enough government budget. And we are trying to create new downstream solutions in several industries, such as environment, finance, to avoid price competition. So we're trying to combine different data sources and technologies to create new solutions. And we work with a partner in the target industry. And these are the keys for success in the future. So here's an example. We have developed some new product for the media industry. So in the past, we provide the image itself to the media industry, but now we're providing the in-orbit camera. So they, send us the capture requests. So it's a new product, and some of the media companies like Yomiuri and NHK are making use of this new product. And in terms of the combining different data sources and technologies, we have some future plan. For example, we are now operating the mid-resolution imaging satellite called Bruce. But in the future, we are planning to launch high-resolution satellites. And by combining these two different type of data, we can realize that the tip and cue function. I mean, the mid-resolution constellation are monitoring a very wide area with a high temporal resolution. And when those mid-resolution satellites find some insights and the location to be monitored precisely, they send a capture request directly to the high-resolution satellite, and the high-resolution satellites take the picture of that location. So it enables us to realize the dynamic capturing function using both satellite types of satellites. And another example is that we work with Sony, and they provide a IoT service, and the receivers are put on our satellites. And we're trying to create new business using both IoT and remote sensing functions. And I think it's a combination between micro data and macro data, because the IoT sensors can get very local in situ data. On the other hand, the remote sensing data can capture a very wide area, so-called macro data. So the micro data and macro data can see the same phenomena from the different aspects, so which will add new values to see what's happening on the ground. So I think that combination would create new values. So we are now talking to potential clients in various industries, and we are starting the POCs very soon. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
So Nakamura-san, as our next speaker gets ready, I have a follow-up question for you. Your business model is to develop the satellite, to build the satellite, and then actually to operate the satellite. Eventually, would you transfer the satellite to your client, or do you plan to just do, satellites as a service?
Well, it depends. For the Axel business data service, I distribute only the data. But for Axel Liner service, satellite manufacturing service, we normally develop the dedicated satellite for customers based on their specific needs. So we do both. But we see the potentials of combining these different business to offer something new, because in the developing countries we see new demands. They want to have their satellites, they want to utilize the satellite data, and we have a menu, so we can offer many potential service to them. So it's quite important to have different type of business at Axelspace.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. I've got some more questions, but we'll save them for our discussion period. Our next speaker is Shota. Shota from Digital Blast. And we're talking about data from space, which is already a business. What about manufacturing in space?
Thank you for having me today. I'm delighted to be here to talk about space manufacturing. I'm Shota Deguchi from Digital Blast. So before we start, I would like to talk about a bit about myself. I started my career as an IT consultant in IBM Japan, and I have worked on cloud and IoT services for 4 years. And after IBM, I changed my career, moved to a Japanese consulting firm. And at the time, I have worked on the remote sensing project. And that was the first space-related project for me. And in 2018, I joined Digital Blast, and I have worked on the satellite data utilization. And now I'm a sales director for future space experiment to space station. So let's dive into the main topic. First of all, I'm going to talk about the general trends of space manufacturing, and then I'm going to introduce the case of Digital Blast. So there is largely three areas that we could sell space-made product. First of all, the market on Earth and the market in space, especially low Earth orbit. And in the future, the market on Moon and Mars. Since there is actual markets on Earth, it would be more tangible to discuss the potential of space manufacturing rather than other markets, even though other market is also expected to grow. Therefore, I'd like to talk about space manufacturing, especially for Earth today. So why we should manufacture in space rather than orbit? That is because there is a microgravity environment, and that is the best place for certain chemical and material production. Under that circumstances, Japan and the US governments have made decision to commercialize low Earth orbit, and they have already made partnerships with some prospective companies as a successor for government, and Digital Blast is one of the companies. And meanwhile, the private companies have also been demonstrating their feasibility for space manufacturing. Let's say one of the leading tech startups, Gitai, they provide robot arms to ISS. And then one of the largest manufacturer, Mitsubishi Electric, they provide 3D printer to ISS to make like solar panels in space. And even other startups like Space Power Technologies, they have been developing wireless solar power transmission. And the elevation space, they have been developing their satellite for experiment and manufacturing platform in space.
So just to briefly interrupt you, those are all Japanese startup companies.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Mitsubishi Electric, not startup, but yeah, all Japanese companies.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, on the other hand, we would spend more time to make it happen in common. I would say more than 15 years to make it happen. I would like to introduce some major challenges. First of all, accessibility space. As you can imagine, we need more launch opportunities, even though currently SpaceX launch rockets almost every couple of days. But ideally, we need it every day. And by the same token, we need to develop more spaceports to launch rockets across the countries. And challenge two is the repeatability of research. For mass manufacturing, we need a bunch of research data from space for POCs to make sure if we can make stable product in space. And the challenge three is the re-entry infrastructure. In terms of the full value chain, we definitely have to enhance the transportation from space to the ground to bring our product to the ground as timely as possible. However, I would say there are promising products to be made in space. Let's say pharmaceuticals, we could create high quality crystallization of proteins in space that have a significant impact on manufacturing cost, stability, and efficacy of pharmaceuticals, especially for cancer and HIV/AIDS. And optical fiber is also a promising product. We could create a Zebulon filter in space as an almost a perfect condition, because we are free from convection effect in space. And even artificial organs, we could bioprint human soft tissue in space without any buoyancy and sedimentation in space. And those three products have already been demonstrated by US private companies. The Barda Space Industries, they made pharmaceuticals for HIV/AIDS in this year. And Flores Photonics, they produced Zebulon fiber on ISS this year. And last year, Red Wire made first human knee meniscus on ISS. Beyond that, these products would be expected for a higher unit price per kilo. That is to say, it would be eventually profitable. So I would like to introduce what Digital Blast do for space manufacturing. As for our mission, that is make space valuable, which means we aim to maximize the value of space utilization. That is the very idea of commercialization in space. We especially focus on the manufacturing and R&D platform. And after establishing those platforms in low Earth orbit, we would like to make sure the feasibility and bring those technologies and the products to other space and also to the Earth as well. Currently, we are developing 3 small-scale manufacturing chambers: Amatsu, Tamaki, and Amatsu Alpha. Amatsu and Tamaki are used to explore the plant cultivation methods for future life in space. And Amatsu Alpha is used to used for cell culture as an initial step to create artificial organs. And the size of Amatsu and Amatsu Alpha is approximately 40 centimeter high and 20 centimeter diameter. So it's equivalent of the 2 literal plastic bottles. And even Tamaki, the size is twice. Meanwhile, we are also working on some other businesses on the ground, like R&D and implementation service for utilization in space, and also the data utilization consulting through IoT and satellite as well, so that we can reinvest income for our sustainable product development in addition to fundraising. Now, let me introduce some actual projects. We have already had contract with JAXA to conduct concept study of Japanese manned space activity and also the low Earth orbit commercialization. And between US and Japan, we are working with Axelspace, one of the leading space tech company in the US, to bring Amatsu and Amatsu Alpha and Tamaki to the space station. On top of that, we have started researches on life science, especially genome analytics in the space with many Japanese universities. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. So, Deguchi-san, I think it's fascinating that you have an extremely long time to market to really get into manufacturing in space. So as you're developing your manufacturing technologies, you're also actually doing consulting in these projects for space. What is the kind of, this kind of brings us to the first general topic for all of our questions and discussion, and that's fundraising. So yes, traditional VCs, this has been much too long a process, not just manufacturing, but anything related to space for kind of usual VC hope that you'll have an exit within 5 or 6 years. So Kohtake-sensei, what's your perception of kind of the venture capital investment side of this equation, or how are space ventures getting funded in Japan now?
Okay, and yeah, I think we have several points. And so, in case of the space ventures, so there are several categories. For example, the space data businesses. So in this case, it's not take a time, but to the development of the hardware, especially rocket, they need much time. So the target if this is depends on the target. And so I'm not the venture capitalist, but I have some advice to them. And sometimes, so they have some mix with several space activities, not only
So
rocket.
actually, I'm kind of setting you up because nobody here can see what you wrote in chat. We got a great question from chat about a specific fund that's in Japan, and you wrote a great answer. So just to relay this is a space strategy fund,
Okay.
which is money that JAXA is actually managing, right? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Okay. On the chat, I sent out this. And so the purpose of the Japanese strategy fund is that for the mainly the research and development for the private companies and the universities, because I already mentioned the JAXA manages so many space activities, but they want to expand the activities not only inside JAXA but also the so many stakeholders. Then, so that in case of the Japan Space Strategy Fund, JAXA will be the funding agencies, and so many key.
But this is not government grant. It's really like a venture capital thing where they're buying stock in the company.
Yeah.
Or is it more a research grant?
More.
Okay, so like a small business innovation research kind of
And
to help commercialization.
To improve some technology level. TRL, technology readiness level.
Okay. So the reason I ask is our question that came in from Zoom came in from a VC investor in New York who says that they're with a firm that does VC investments and specifically asked if there are ways for American investors and startups to cooperate with Japanese entities in this space strategy fund.
First phase, Japanese strategy fund to increase their activities by Japanese fund. And then, of course, so the company and the university would like to invite the fund from the outside Japan. So this is some fund for to start these activities. It's very welcome for the outside Japan.
Okay, I want to stay with this topic for a minute and ask Nakamura-san, how has the venture capital landscape changed since Axelspace first started? Are you going after venture capital and fundraising now, or are you aiming at being more kind of bootstrap, self-financed?
So thank you for the question. Now the venture capitals all around Japan are so eager to invest in space startups, and many venture capitals outside Japan have also a strong interest in space industry in Japan, because as we have had a discussion, the Japanese government has secured a large fund to support mainly the Japanese space startups. And back in 2015, when we first raised the big fund from the venture capital, it was quite difficult because there was no track record for the venture capital to invest in space startups. So the situation drastically changed since then. Now there are many venture capitals investing in space startups, and now we see the space dedicated venture capital also exists, and we see various type of VCs in Japan, like early stage startup, early stage venture capitals, and for the investing in later stage startups. So we see the ecosystem has been creating since mid 2010s, and another important point is that more and more space startups are raising funds not only in Japan but from other VCs outside Japan, and I heard that there is a new fund of the Singaporean the venture capitals. They created the fund dedicated to the investment in the Japanese startups. So the situation is changing. And talking about Axelspace, we have raised over $100 million so far. And I don't know whether if we have another round, but we have secured some budget, and the last fundraising was the December last year. So we can't say anything in the near future, but we're of course pursuing the further growth to expand our business globally. So anyway, we have the demands to raise another fund. It might be the IPO, or it might be another round in the private.
So raising 100 million is very impressive in any business. Are most of your investors from Japan, or are you raising internationally?
So at the moment, we have only the domestic investors because our first round was back in 2015. So luckily we were able to raise all the funds in Japan, but it's getting difficult to raise only in Japan because the raising amount is increasing. So I think more and more startups seek for the fundraising opportunities outside Japan as well.
And in that regard, Deguchi-san, you've been here for a year. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of your vision for the internationalization of what Digital Blast is doing?
Okay, internationalization.
Yeah, either with partners or in fundraising or whatever. Why are you here?
Okay. Yeah, shortly speaking, I'm here to establish the outpost in the US and to join the US market. Yeah, as you know, the US market in space is the most biggest market. And like Dr. Joshua said, international cooperation is crucial, especially for space industries. So we have already been working with space, Axelspace, and it's not enough, obviously. So we are still looking for some business partners in the US. It's not only with some private companies, but also universities like Stanford, and then and the investors as well. So yeah, I'm still looking for such an I'm still scouting those potential partners and customers.
Okay. So I have one more question kind of for Kohtake Sensei. You had talked about working on the CubeSat, and this was a really interesting concept. It was almost like the first standard product in the space world where you had a set size, a set weight under 100 kilograms, and I think was it supposed to be 100 centimeters or 130 centimeters or whatever. The size for the CubeSat was also fixed, right? How has that changed the business? Since then, is the CubeSat kind of used in order to calculate space on launch vehicles? I know. Has that been something that really stimulated the law?
Yeah. Yeah, as you may know, that many years ago, we launched a big satellite, but country, we have so many small satellites. And so one people ask me on the chat, and so sometimes each small satellite collaborate like big satellite. And so we reduce the risk, and also we can reduce the launch cost. And also,
so these are typically constellations,
yes,
where they're all flying independently, but they're cooperating.
And one of the unique point is that you don't have to launch a small satellite by the rocket, and astronauts take the small satellite, and so they flew from the International Space Station. This is one of the Japanese services. This is the unique features. And so we can launch so many small satellites. And so this is the distributed computing. And so we change the world. And so our target is remote sensing and the communication. But currently the navigation, we need a big satellite because the control is very difficult. But I think this area, Dr. Nakamura is much more familiar for the commercial. because he's one of the pioneers.
Nakamura-san, comments?
Yeah. Dasha-san, it's a great question. I think the CubeSat is the first successful example in terms of business in the space industry. So because they standardized the specification, right? And what happened is exciting. Now we see an ecosystem in the CubeSat arena, right? And many companies are trying to develop the components or scientific payloads to be on board the CubeSat, right? And I think it became that commodity, right? So I learned a lot from the CubeSat. And what we are trying to do now is to make microsatellite another commodity so that we can mass manufacture and we can deliver the value to as many people as possible. So I learned a lot from CubeSat how to create new business in the space industry.
So in that regard, Deguchi-san, do you think that the Azama and the kind of manufacturing modules, the chambers that Digital Blast is developing, are you aiming at that kind of a standard product?
For satellites?
Yeah, or for manufacturing in space.
In terms of the commodity, I think it's totally same as Dr. Nakamura. We are aiming to establish such a platform, manufacturing platform in space, and then we want many companies to use our platform. They can join the space industry and eventually, commercialize in low Earth.
Okay, so let's open the floor to questions from the audience. Anyone have a question? You first. I saw your hand first, and then I saw Steve.
Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to hear from you all. Not really quite meet yet. At the start of the talk, you talked about the human resources issue and hiring for space talent in Japan. What incentives do you guys have to compel talented engineers internationally to prevent, it's a lot of engineers are drawn to the Bay Area due to higher salaries and a whole bunch of things. The companies here do a lot to retain and keep the people who work here. What are companies in Japan or in the space industry with you all trying to do the same thing?
Thank you very much. And so, maybe Nakamura-san is based on these issues. And so the one issue is that, we need deep tech experiences and the know-how for the space industry. But in Japan, so sometimes it's difficult to find the right persons. And so we would like to invite the people, any country, any nationalities. And second one is that internationalization is very important because our space activities not only for Japan but also all over the world, and so international communication is very important. For example, if we invite some people from Africa, we can understand the issue in Africa, and so this communication is very important. So any additional comments from Nakamura-san?
So that's a tough question. And I think every space startup in Japan has that kind of issue. In addition to that, as you know, the Japanese yen is very weak at the moment. It's quite tough to hire the talent from other countries. So actually, so many of the employees from other countries at Axelspace love Japan. So that's one kind of advantage of Japan. There are a very unique culture, and people with some higher level of skills like Japan and as a company to work in would be promising because and the space is very attractive. So many of the people, following people at Axelspace like that. But we want to, as we grow, we need to provide some incentives, as you said, to attract more, capable talent in the near future. But at the moment, we only have offices in Tokyo. So that's the current situation. But I'm aware that we need to change to attract more talent.
If you don't mind, I'd like to comment briefly on this. One of Japan's extremely well-funded space startups is iSpace. They developed lunar lander technology and were one of the 5 finalists for the Google Lunar X Prize. Anyway, a few years ago, I ran into an Israeli guy who used to work for iSpace and decided that he wanted to get his PhD at a Japanese university. So he went to Tohoku University and finished his PhD in robotics and has started his own kind of agricultural robotics company from research that he did at Tohoku University. So this is, the kind of specific example. You can't say it's a huge trend, but I'm seeing more and more interesting things with interesting people who are making choices like that.
Yeah. Yes. Very welcome to Japan.
Steve, go ahead. You had a question.
Hi there, I'm Steve Spencer. I'm a graduate student here at Stanford University. My question was concerning space, not only as the final frontier, but now as the next battlefield. We've seen an increased emphasis on space as a domain of warfare. So much so that even the JASDF, the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, is set to rename by 2027 to the Japanese Air and Space Self-Defense Force. Given that the government of Japan has just increased their GDP cap from 1% to 2%, and I believe we're currently at 1.6% spending, with anticipated, by 2025 of March, hitting that 2% cap, which will bring it in line with other Western countries' defense spending. How are the startup companies in the space industry looking to take advantage of this new funding? And then how do you anticipate that impacting space startups as well?
Go ahead.
Sorry, little long one.
Your question, the potential that we can get the fund from kind of the defense budget.
Yeah, so I think in general, and then individually as well, company wise, how do you see just this increase in defense spending? I think it's something to the tune of like $100 billion more a year. Impact just space startup in general, given that
So let me kind of rephrase this.
Sorry, go.
Because what you're taking macro scale phenomena and putting it down into micro decisions, right? Certainly, space has always had this kind of unusual relationship between defense and commercial use. In the US, NASA was only created after space activities were started by the regular parts of the Department of Defense. And so, commercial space, that's, I think, easy in Japan, whereas there's a lot of venture capital companies whose LPs will not allow any investment in military-related technology, right? There are, it's kind of not nearly as, in the US, if you mention defense, it's easy to get government money. In Japan, if you mention defense, that's not a great way to get government money, generally. Instead, national defense for Japan has been economic security. And that's why a lot of the work that was commercial in Japan has kind of stayed out of the whole defense area. Now, there are Japanese large companies that make satellites for the Japanese government that I bet I couldn't find out anything more than that. They're up there, they're taking pictures that we don't know what they're looking at. But do you think that with regard to defense and the Japanese space industry, what do you think is going to happen? So,
Yeah.
you're ready to comment.
Yeah, that is a very good point. For right now, in Japan, such kind of the space business opportunities from different Ministry of Defense, there are obviously such an opportunities, and some companies work with the ministries, and even my company, some of the project is with defense ministries, and in my opinion, if we want to grow our company in the US, I think that is a good strategies to work wisely with such a sector. Even though we don't have such a knowledge for right now, but yeah, there are huge budget from there. So yeah, I'm still considering that.
Okay. Further comments? Yeah.
Yes, and I already mentioned that 20 years ago, space activity mainly managed by Ministry of Science and Technology, R&D. But however, in 20 years, Japanese Cabinet Office manage space activities. So the collaboration with defense people is much more active right now. However, the purpose is very important. And so if we support the space activity for making a new weapon, so it sometimes not acceptable. But for the disaster management, so most people can. So then, for example, I have several people from the defense people as PhD student. So they cannot do the research for the missile navigations, but they can try to research for the navigation for the drone. But basic technology is the same. Then so this kind of communication and to show the purpose is very strategic. And so this is a different situation compared to the United States. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Nakamura-san, I have kind of a different question, and this came in online to me as a direct message. Prakash is asking, mentions that satellites typically have a lifespan of over 20 years now. And this does require steering and, especially if you have requests from different clients for the satellite to be pointed in a different direction or whatever. How do you plan for the life cycle of the satellite, and what do you plan to do with the satellite at the end? What are the requirements, and what's Axelspace's approach?
So we're operating on the low Earth orbit, so the lifespan would be like 5 years or so. So using more than 20 years is not realistic for the low Earth orbit satellites. And we, established the concept called green spacecraft to keep the sustainability on the ground in space. So we're now trying to automate the collision avoidance operation so that to mitigate the risk of collision in orbit during the operation. And also after the end of life, we try to remove the satellite from the orbit as soon as possible. So we have a so-called PMD, post-mission disposal device. In our case, we deploy the membrane to the satellite to lower the altitude as soon as possible. And now, recently we see the 5-year rule. Meaning that after the end of life, we should remove the satellite within 5 years. So we're following that new regulations. Now it's only applicable to the US only, but we want to achieve that technology. And I believe that every satellite operator should comply with that new regulation so that we can continuously use the space, toward the future. So I think that we have to lead that initiative to keep the space environment clean.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be more and more of an issue. The number of satellites in orbit right now are what, 2,000 or 3,000? And, they're expecting more than 18,000 or 20,000 within the next 5 years or so. It's getting kind of crowded up there. Nakamura-san, how are you going to, what do you have to go through before you get approval to launch a satellite?
So that's a very difficult question. So we need to have our intensive discussion within the industry. Not even a single player can solve that kind of issue. It's kind of an environmental problem. So it should be an international issue that should be discussed among within the industry. So there is some organization, for example, Conference. I forgot the exact name, but some are the public organization, some are the private organization who are trying to solve the kind of issue. One of the topics is that space traffic management to avoid the collision and to reduce the space debris. So we need to have a rule, and of us, we need to follow that rule. So it's the establishing phase. I think it takes a few more years, but it's quite important to have the sustainable space industry.
Okay, other questions from the floor? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Nakamura-san. You mentioned that during the infancy stages of your company, one of the challenges was securing VC funding back in the days of 2008 for space, right? And then later on, you partnered with the Weather News company. I'm curious as to how you acquired Weather News to become your partner, and how you kind of approach the strategic partnership there.
Great question.
So it might not be an interesting answer, but it was luck, just luck. Actually, the manager, technology manager at Weather News, was from the University of Tokyo, Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and the Professor Nakasuka and that guy knew each other for a long time. And Weather News was looking for the ways to realize their service, providing navigation service to shipping companies. And the Professor Nakasuka was leading the initiative to create a university startup. And they met, they had a discussion, and the Professor Nakasuka introduced the initiative to create the startup, and we met, started discussion. It took 6 months though, for them to decide to make a final decision. But that's how we met and had a discussion. It was not easy, but I was so lucky to meet with them.
Can I ask a follow-up question of how did you get to that yes then within that 6-month period?
Actually, they needed a business plan, and they needed to know the cost schedule, because they were a listed company. They needed to explain the business plan to the stakeholders. So it was not so quick, but I think it was a necessary step. We also had a time to analyze the situation and what kind of satellite could solve that issue. So we had a technical discussion, we had a business discussion. So it took 6 months. It was necessary because most of the satellite projects start with the specification. JAXA provides specification to the satellite manufacturers. Then they can start the satellite development just after they got a specification. But what Weather News gives us is not a specification. They want to monitor icebergs. So we need to create a specification out of the requirements. It was it was not so easy, and it takes time to create the specification and agrees on what would be possible and what would be not possible. So that's the process we saw before during the establishment of the business together.
Okay, thank you. We're about out of time. And so I'm going to have to ask one last question to the panel. What's going to happen when the ISS shuts down? What do you think will be the impact on space business of the end of the International Space Station? Well, Dr. Sensei, you first.
Okay, and so International Space Station is one of the key infrastructure. And of course, that if not using ISS, we have a business impact for mainly the human space flight. However, the country, the most amount of the space business is a non-human space flight, right? Satellite.
Yeah.
And then, so if we cannot ISS, yeah, we can still expand the space businesses. And also, yeah, like Digital Blast, so they are trying to use the commercial human space flight, right? Space station. And so this is a good chance to make new space stations.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Nakamura-san, any final comments on that post-ISS?
Yeah, I agree with Kohtake sensei. So we see more and more opportunities and more private companies try to do something in space to compensate the loss of the ISS. And we're not involved in the ISS business, but without ISS, I think we have more opportunities to do some technology demonstration opportunity using the satellite platform. So it's quite important to look for opportunities after the post ISS era.
Okay, and Deguchi-san, you have the last word.
Yeah, the post-ISS, that is definitely the turning point for space industries. And lots of private companies are interested in joining space industry at that period. And so I strongly recommend you all that you should pay very attention to what's the commercial space station going on, because that's our activity is kind of the beginning of creating space existence, including our company. Space station, through space station, many services will appear around 2030, the time of retirement of ISS.
And now this is only 5.5 years.
That's right.
2030 sounds like a long time. So before we all thank our panelists, I want to say a special thank you to Kimberly and to Brianna for helping make these programs work every week. That's a big deal. And I want to thank all of you for supporting our series, for having an interest in the kind of topics that we've been able to introduce. We hope you will come back in the fall. We'll be doing a similar series about innovations in supply chains in Asia. And we'll do our entrepreneurship series again next spring. So thanks very much to you for coming and participating. And thanks very much for a great panel discussion.